Greetings, everybody. I'm back again. It's a beautiful day here in Manhattan. And yes, there is a pandemic. We're all aware of this. I do believe there's a silver lining here. And, you know, without trying to pontificate to you all about this, the fact is that if you have some downtime to create a new rhythm, and that rhythm is the time and the space to peer in more deeply within yourself, to understand yourself. When we're working and there's very little time, we tend to lose perspective in certain ways. So now, if you have been a bit disengaged, it's a wonderful time to allow that personal unfolding to occur, to reconnect with yourself on a deeper level. Music is part of that. Creativity, writing, thinking, not doing too much thinking at all. Of course, staying in the dimensional zones of your overall health, very important. Frequency, keeping your frequency high. That said, these records here and music is about frequency. Okay, when people are not anxious, when they are in a free zone, where they're able to emote freely, they are whole, and nothing can get in their way. So stay in that zone. Music is obviously a part of that, and of course the particularity of the things that you resonate with that encourage that frequency within the music, like records like this, for example, so important. Today I'm going to start with a perfectly titled record for what I'm talking about, Dreams and Explorations by the Don Friedman Quartet with Attila Zoller on guitar. Friedman I've reviewed before. Don Friedman, a wonderful musician, buttressing, you know, the modern to avant-garde movement. Again, a peer of Bill Evans, a considerable musician. This record here takes the finer points of harmonic extensions in very lyrical ways. So I bring this record to your attention because these records on Riverside from the early to mid 60s are significantly overlooked. And for people that are into the next wave of great jazz that came from ECM, these records should be looked at more closely. Without getting into technical detail, there is a lyricism, there's a harmonic edge, conceptually and constructively, very, very interesting music. So check it out. And of course here, these are the Library of Congress recordings of Jelly Roll Morton. And, you know, again, you know, a lot of the people that are currently into modern jazz, they sometimes poo-poo the earlier eras of jazz. And it's kind of sad because the fountainhead of the music, at its purest, has the same sort of visceral power as the modern music and the new thing stuff of the 60s. It's really about, you know, the truth. And, you know, Jelly Roll Morton and a bunch of his colleagues who were playing in the red light district at that time, some of these were considerable. Tony Jackson, for one, was a guy that Jelly Roll Morton feared, but no one knows who Tony Jackson is. But there were a number of these pianists that were coming up with the language, Jelly Roll being one of them. A number of people kind of took Jelly Roll to task, saying that he was a bit of an egocentric, thinking that he was a creator of jazz. Well, in fact, he was. And these Library of Congress recordings not only document the stories of his life, but also the examples of the development of the art itself. So these are indispensable. And Circle Records actually did these recordings in 1939, actually Library of Congress recorded them 1939, 1940, you know, about a year before Jelly Roll passed away. And then Moash at Circle Records ended up, you know, putting them out. in the mid-40s. And then, of course, Riverside got the rights to them and put them out again. Any iteration of these as a set is indispensable. Anyone who is a jazz scholar, a jazz musician, a jazz lover needs to have this set. This record here is his boyhood memories. Not only is the record compelling because of the actual stories themselves and appearing into a world that is far distant from what we are experiencing now, but the actual vocal quality of Jelly Roll Morton. This character, this precocious individual who is a collision between the sophisticated lives of the cultured, Renaissance of Europe through New Orleans and, the lowest of the low in the red light district through the madams that were running these, brothels. I mean, it's just an astonishing, experience. So check it out, Riverside. This is the third issuing of these recordings. This was probably 1959 or 1960. However you find it, check it out. You won't be sorry. Ammons, a very important influence on a number of musicians across the board. Doesn't seem to get the play that he probably should, and maybe it was because there was not a lot of continuity in his life or in his career. Actually, he had been incarcerated for drugs. He was off the scene for certain periods of time. He came back. He was doing gigs. I'm not sure if he was on the Chitlin circuit. I'm not sure as to how it unfolded when he came out of prison. He did make records. He made some wonderful records. This is one of them. It's a record you don't see very often. And what's significant about this record is that John Coltrane is playing alongside him, and he's playing alto on this record. And this is during the period where Coltrane is a tenor player. These are not early recordings. So the interesting thing is the blend between the tenor of Ammons and Coltrane on alto and Coltrane's alto interludes as a soloist, make this a really interesting record. You're not going to see too many post-1955 records with John Coltrane playing alto. So just for that alone, this is a record that people should be taking a closer look at, along with the fact that everything that comes out of Gene Ammons during this period is just pure beauty. He's got a gorgeous tone. I mean, you got Gene Ammons, Coltrane on alto, Jerome Richardson on flute, Pepper Adams on baritone, Waldron on piano, Taylor on drums, Kinnichet's also on tenor. So you have two tenors and Coltrane sandwiched in between those two. With, you got a groove blues, you got It Might As Well Be Spring. These are long, kind of just expansive blues-orientated jams that are semi-magical. Some of these records don't come off very well at all, and some do, and this one's a nice record. So I think beyond the fact that it's a solid record, for the jazz archivist, for the jazz completist, for the jazz, curiositor, this is a record that should be on the radar. It's certainly one that could occupy space on anyone's shelf. I think as you collect records, people try to minimize and keep the things that really are indispensable. This record would not be fodder. So, again, this is, Prestige is a bit different than Blue Note. These sessions are not really rehearsed to any great extent like Blue Note was. There was more preparation on Blue Note recordings, which is why the Blue Notes tend to have more structural significance to them, and these seem to be more jammy for the most part. Unless, of course, you have an Elmo Hope or a Waldron who's a very good writer, an excellent pianist, and is guiding the rhythm section in a certain way. So, again, Ammons, wonderful. He's an inspirational player with a beautiful tone. He makes everyone realize that no matter what instrument you play, it's the tone that starts everything. If you do not have a good tone, if your speaking voice is unpleasant, people are not going to listen to you. So that's what this guy has going for him beyond everything else. of the late 1950s, early to mid 19th. Well, he passed in 1963, so I mean, for me, his big period is 58 to 63 when he passed away, and that's the one and only Sonny Clark. Sonny, you know, came up playing upright pianos. I mean, he actually had a wonderful gig on the West Coast with Buddy DeFranco, and played with a number of other esteemed, you know, players on the West Coast, but ended up back in New York, and, you know, Blue Note caught wind of him, played a couple of sessions, ultimately becoming one of their house pianists. Played on so many great records, and this is one of the iconic, you know, Sonny Clark records. This is not an original. This is probably his most expensive record. This would probably go about $3,000 if it was clean. But Sonny is just, you know, again, a delivery that is, it's not sloppy, but he's like a saloon pianist playing modern harmony with post-bop, with all of the innovations of post-bop and the varieties of different, you know, compositional conceptions within the idiom. So he spans a lot of those developments. So to me, as indispensable as, say, Horace Silver, a little bit more subterranean. Horace obviously is at the front of the line in terms of, you know, his notice for the idiom, you know, taking gospel and a lot of earthy elements and bringing it into, you know, the modern harmonic language. But this guy has done it as well. It's a little bit rougher, it's a little bit rawer, it's a little bit bluesier in a certain organic way. You know, this guy lived a street life. He was kind of an innocuous, you know, little guy who, you know, went from place to place playing piano and trying to get a fix. And, you know, his time was marked. He didn't have a lot of time. So we're lucky to have these specimens available when we can find them. If you can find any of the earlier records on good pressings, these are records that you need to own. You would think that, you know, with the content, the compositional, you know, genius of Porgy and Bess, that, you know, every record, you know, that would comprise this material would be, you know, memorable. I would say a number of them are. There were a number of releases once Porgy and Bess became very prominent in the 1950s that were commercial entities, and really they don't stand up. I guess to go back to the beginning, you know, Gershwin's original Porgy and Bess was not a raving success, and it fell into obscurity for about 20 years. In the mid-1950s, I mean, Gershwin having died in 1937, you know, people started to kind of, you know, champion this piece again. And it gained a lot of, you know, notice around the world. People were starting to record this. Lots of stuff was put out. This record here is salient because Bill Potts, a Washington, D.C. based arranger and composer, ended up, you know, leading this session, bringing together astonishing musicians throughout the New York scene, you know, including Bill Evans, including Bob Brookmeyer, including, you know, just a host of the best brass men, Art Farmer. I mean, just, you know, it's just, this is an astonishing record. And it's astonishing because Bill Potts has a wonderful imagination. His sense of arranging, his worldview is different. So he's approaching this music from a completely different sensibility. You know, the tempos, you know, things that would be, you know, at a lower or mid-tempo are taken at a faster pace. But you don't lose any of the drama. You don't lose any of the things that make the music powerful to begin with, which is a very difficult thing to do. So this was a limited edition that United Artists put out. Jack Lewis. This is a labor of love by Jack Lewis, who was the head of A&R at United Artists and was heading up the jazz portion of this label at that time. You have Art Farmer, Harry Edison, Bernie Glow, Ozzie Markowitz, Charlie Shaver, Bob Brookmeyer, Frank Rehak, Jimmy Cleveland, Earl Swope, Rod Lever, Saul Schlinger, Zoot Sims, Al Cohn, Phil Woods, Gene Quill, Herbie Powell on guitar, Charlie Persip on drums, Bill Evans on piano, George Duvivier on bass, Bill Potts conducted, and Andre Previn himself wrote the liner notes and the booklet.
Hell of a lineup.
Discussing this piece of music. Andre Previn was in the studio for all of the recordings, and he pronounces it as just a magical, period of recording in New York history. This was 1959. People tend to neglect this record. I've seen it around. I've had it in my bins quite a bit. People don't even look at it. I have sold 2 copies of it. I have 3 more copies in the back room. It is a hard record to find. It was a limited edition, but again, people really aren't paying attention to it. If you love jazz, if you love brass sonorities, if you love very unique arranging, this is a record you got to look at. Bill Evans is parsing, within the rhythm section and the interludes of his own soloing between the brazen interludes of brass are beautiful.